The ceremony was meant to honor the base's finest. 200 soldiers stood in formation as Brigadier General Whitmore's helicopter descended toward Fort Sill. What none of them knew, not the commanders, not the NCOs, certainly not the soldiers who had shaved a woman's head in the latrine 3 hours ago, was that the general had not come to inspect. He had come to collect someone, and when he found out what they had done to her, careers would end before sunset. But that reckoning was still hours away. To understand what happened that morning, you need to go back 3 weeks to the day Staff Sergeant Kira O'Yelleran first arrived at Fort Sill with transfer orders and a duffel bag and absolutely nothing to prove. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed someone being underestimated where you are from. Master Sergeant Dale Pritchard noticed her the moment she stepped off the transport. He noticed everything that happened on his base, even if the official chain of command had different ideas about who actually ran things around here. 18 years in the Army had taught him that paperwork was just decoration. Real power lived in the spaces between regulations, in the favors owed and secrets kept and quiet arrangements that made the machine actually function. The new sergeant was small. That was his first observation. Maybe 5'4", with dark skin and close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that bothered him for reasons he could not immediately name. She carried herself like someone who knew exactly where she was going, which was strange for a transfer who should have been disoriented and eager to make friends. Pritchard turned to Sergeant First Class Bryn Hollister, his most reliable enforcer. "You see her?" Hollister followed his gaze. "Supply clerk. Transferred from Fort Hood. Her file says she is unremarkable." Pritchard watched O'Yelleran disappear into the administration building. "Then why does she look at this base like she is memorizing it?" The first week passed without incident. O'Yelleran reported to the supply warehouse, processed requisition forms, maintained inventory logs, and spoke to almost no one. She ate alone in the DFAC. She ran alone at 500. She kept her quarters immaculate, and her interactions brief and professional. It drove Pritchard insane. He had built his power structure on understanding people, on identifying what they wanted and what they feared and using both to bind them to him. But O'Yelleran seemed to want nothing. She never complained about the worst shifts he assigned her. She never reacted when Hollister accidentally bumped her in the hallway hard enough to send her stumbling. She just absorbed everything with those watchful dark eyes and that infuriating composure. On day 10, Pritchard decided to test her directly. He found her in the warehouse, conducting inventory on vehicle parts, the kind of tedious work he assigned to people he wanted to break. She was counting spark plugs with the same focus a surgeon might give to an operation. "Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran," he said, letting his voice fill the space. She looked up, not startled, not nervous, just looked up like she had been expecting him. "Master Sergeant Pritchard, you settling in all right?" "Yes, Master Sergeant." He moved closer, invading her space in the way that made most junior NCOs step back. She did not move. Good. Because I run a tight operation here. Everyone pulls their weight. Everyone knows their place. You understand what I am saying?" "I understand, Master Sergeant." Her voice was calm, unreadable. That accent underneath, something he could not quite place. Nigerian, maybe. It did not matter. What mattered was the way she held his stare without challenge, but without submission either. Like she was looking through him at something he could not see. He leaned closer. "I've been doing this a long time, Sergeant. I know when someone does not belong. And you," he let the word hang, "you feel like someone who does not belong." She said nothing. "Am I wrong?" "I'm just here to do my job, Master Sergeant." He waited for more. There was no more. She simply returned to counting spark plugs, dismissing him without dismissing him. Pritchard felt heat rise in his chest. He turned and walked out of the warehouse, already planning. That night, he gathered Hollister and Specialist Trey Mulvaney in the motor pool. The night air was thick and hot, typical Oklahoma summer that turned the base into a slow cooker. "She is watching us," Pritchard said. "I do not know what she is looking for, but we need to find out before she finds it." Private First Class DeAndre Kimball was failing his promotion exam for the 3rd time when Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran found him in the empty classroom at 2200 hours. He looked up, startled, shoving the study materials under his notebook like a kid caught with contraband. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that made the night shifts feel even longer. O'Yelleran stood in the doorway. She did not ask what he was doing. She did not make small talk. She simply walked to the desk beside his and sat down. "Fire direction procedures," she said. "That is where you are struggling." Kimball felt his face flush. "How do you know that?" "I reviewed the training records. Part of supply coordination." She pulled the notebook from under his hands, her movements gentle but certain. "You understand the theory. You freeze on application." For a moment, he considered lying. Considered the masculine pride that had kept him suffering in silence, while soldiers half as dedicated passed him by. But something in her calm, dark eyes made dishonesty feel pointless. "I choke," he admitted. "Soon as the timer starts, everything I know just disappears." O'Yelleran nodded, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "Then we will practice until the timer does not matter." She stayed with him for 3 hours that night, not teaching him new information, but drilling what he already knew until his hands moved automatically, until the procedures lived in his muscle memory rather than his anxious thoughts. She asked nothing in return. She did not mention it the next day when they passed in the DFAC. She simply showed up again the following night and the night after that. On the fourth night, Kimball finally asked the question that had been burning in him. "Why are you helping me? You do not even know me." O'Yelleran was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached in her pocket and withdrew a photograph, creased and worn at the edges. A woman's face looked up from the image, older, with the same dark skin and high cheekbones as O'Yelleran herself. The same quiet strength in the eyes. "My mother," O'Yelleran said. "She cleaned houses for 30 years, so I could have opportunities she never had. She died believing I would use those opportunities to lift others." Her voice remained steady, but something raw flickered beneath the surface. "I do not help you because I know you, Private Kimball. I help you because she raised me to see when someone is struggling alone." She tucked the photograph away before he could respond. The moment passed, sealed away behind her composure. But Kimball had seen it. The wound she carried. The reason she served. The next morning, Pritchard made his move. The duty roster appeared on the board at 0600, and O'Yelleran's name was listed for every undesirable assignment on the base. Latrine duty. Grease trap cleaning. Overnight inventory in the warehouse with no climate control during the hottest week of the summer. A schedule designed not just to exhaust, but to humiliate. She reported to each assignment without complaint. Pritchard watched from a distance, his frustration mounting. He had broken dozens of soldiers with this treatment. Soldiers with more rank and more experience than this quiet supply clerk. They always cracked eventually. They requested transfers. They filed complaints. They gave him leverage. O'Yelleran gave him nothing. By the end of the second week, the rumors started. Pritchard made sure of it. Whispers in the DFAC that she was mentally unstable. Stories in the barracks that she had been transferred from Fort Hood because of an incident no one could quite describe, but everyone agreed was disturbing. The kind of social poison that isolated targets better than any direct attack. Soldiers who might have befriended her kept their distance. The few who had spoken to her stopped. O'Yelleran moved through the base like a ghost, present but untouchable, alone in a crowd of 200. Only Kimball still acknowledged her. A nod in passing. A saved seat in the DFAC that she never took, but that he kept offering anyway. Small rebellions that Pritchard noticed and filed away for later. On day 16, O'Yelleran stayed late in the supply warehouse. The overhead lights had been flickering all week, another maintenance issue that never seemed to reach the top of anyone's priority list. She worked by flashlight, methodical, patient, moving through rows of shelving that held vehicle parts and equipment manifests and 18 months of paperwork that nobody had properly audited. She found the discrepancy at 2347. Requisition forms for vehicle parts that had been ordered, received, and signed for. Parts that did not exist in the physical inventory. Thousands of dollars worth of equipment that had simply vanished into paperwork. O'Yelleran photographed each document with a device that looked like a standard phone, but was something else entirely. Her movements were practiced, efficient, the work of someone who had done this before in places far more dangerous than an Oklahoma supply warehouse. She was sliding the last folder back into place when a shadow fell across the doorway. Hollister stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light. Working late, Staff Sergeant? O'Yelleran's heart rate did not change. Her hands did not tremble. She simply turned, flashlight angled down, her face neutral and unreadable. Inventory discrepancies, she said, trying to reconcile the numbers before the quarterly audit. Hollister stepped closer, her eyes scanning the shelves, the folders, the phone that had already disappeared into O'Yelleran's pocket. The tension stretched between them, two predators recognizing each other in the dark. Pritchard will want to know you are so dedicated, Hollister said finally. Her smile did not reach her eyes. He takes a special interest in dedicated soldiers. She turned and walked away, her boots echoing down the empty corridor. O'Yelleran waited until the sound faded completely, as she allowed herself one slow breath. The evidence was secure. The mission was progressing, but the walls were closing in faster than she had anticipated. Hollister reported to Pritchard within the hour. They stood in the motor pool, surrounded by vehicles that would never see combat and equipment that existed only on paper. The Oklahoma night pressed down on them, heavy with humidity and the electric tension of a coming storm. She was photographing documents, Hollister said. Inventory records. The ones from the East Warehouse. Pritchard felt his stomach drop. He had built his operation carefully over 3 years. Small diversions at first, a few parts here and there, easily explained as clerical errors. Then larger shipments, routed through contacts who asked no questions and paid in cash. Enough money to fund a comfortable retirement far from Army regulations and government audits. And now this woman, this quiet, watchful woman who had appeared from nowhere with her transfer orders and her unreadable eyes. Did she see you? He asked. She saw me. Hollister's jaw tightened. She did not panic, did not make excuses, just said she was reconciling inventory for the audit. Pritchard processed this information. A guilty person would have panicked. An innocent person would have been confused by Hollister's presence. But O'Yelleran had done neither. She had responded like someone who had rehearsed for exactly that moment. She is not regular CID, he said slowly. Criminal investigation would have moved by now. They would have arrested me already. Then what is she? I do not know, but we cannot wait to find out. The next morning, Pritchard implemented Phase 2. O'Yelleran was crossing the parade ground when Hollister intercepted her. The collision looked accidental to anyone watching. Just two soldiers whose paths crossed at the wrong moment. But Hollister's shoulder caught O'Yelleran square in the chest, sending her stumbling backward, her balance lost. She hit the ground hard. Her palms scraped against the concrete. Her knee struck at an angle that sent pain shooting up her leg. Hollister loomed over her. Watch where you're going, Staff Sergeant. Around them, a dozen soldiers witnessed the encounter. None moved to help. None said a word. They had all heard the rumors about O'Yelleran. The unstable clerk from Fort Hood. The woman who did not fit. Getting involved meant risking Pritchard's attention, and nobody wanted that. O'Yelleran rose slowly. She brushed the dust from her uniform, examined the blood welling from her scraped palms, and met Hollister's eyes with an expression that revealed nothing. My apologies, Sergeant First Class, she said. I will be more careful. She walked away without looking back. That night, in her quarters, O'Yelleran activated the encrypted communication device hidden in the lining of her duffel bag. The screen glowed blue in the darkness as she established a secure connection. Phoenix, this is Cardinal. Requesting status update. The voice that responded was distorted, scrambled through layers of encryption that made identification impossible. Cardinal, this is Phoenix Actual. Report. Evidence secured on primary target. Diversion operation confirmed. Approximately $200,000 in misappropriated equipment over 36 months. She paused, weighing her next words. However, indicators suggest the operation extends beyond the NCO level. Requisition approvals require officer signatures. Someone higher is involved. Silence on the line. Then, can you identify the officer? Not yet. I need more time. Your cover may be compromised. Extraction is available. O'Yellerin looked at her scraped palms, at the bruise forming on her knee. Negative. If I extract now, the network survives. They will simply relocate and rebuild. I need to identify all participants before we move. Another pause. The voice that returned carried something that might have been concerned beneath the electronic distortion. Cardinal, your safety is the priority. This mission is not worth your life. She thought of her mother, of the photograph she carried everywhere, of the promise she had made at a graveside 3 years ago. Respect Phoenix actual y disagrada. Cardinal out. She severed the connection and sat in the darkness for a long moment. Outside, thunder rolled across the Oklahoma plains. The storm was coming, and she was running out of time. The following week brought escalation. Someone slashed the tires on her assigned vehicle. Her locker was broken into, personal items scattered across the barracks floor. The duty assignments grew worse, if such a thing was possible. 48-hour shifts with no relief. Details that required her to work alone in isolated areas of the base. Pritchard was sending a message. Leave or be destroyed. Through it all, O'Yellerin endured. She reported each incident through proper channels, knowing the reports would go nowhere. She documented everything, building a case that grew thicker by the day. And she watched, always watching, waiting for the moment when her enemies would make the mistake that exposed them all. Private Kimball found her in the DFAC 3 days before everything changed. He sat down across from her without asking permission, his young face tight with worry. You need to be careful, he said quietly. Pritchard is planning something. I do not know what, but I heard Hollister talking. She said they were going to send a message you could not ignore. O'Yellerin studied him. This young soldier who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by warning her. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only person on this base who ever treated me like I mattered. He swallowed hard. And because whatever they are planning, it is bad. Real bad. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. Thank you, DeAndre. Whatever happens, remember that courage is not about being unafraid. It is about doing what is right despite the fear. He nodded, not fully understanding. He would understand soon enough. That night, Hollister found O'Yellerin outside the barracks. Pritchard wants to see you, she said. Tonight. Latrine building. Just a little conversation. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. O'Yellerin felt the weight of what was coming settle onto her shoulders. She had a choice. She could extract now, abandon the mission, save herself. Or she could walk into whatever trap they had prepared and trust that she would survive it. She thought of her mother, of promises made and prices paid. She went to the latrine. The latrine building sat at the far edge of the barracks complex, a concrete structure that dated back to the 1950s and smelled like decades of bleach and mildew. At 2300 hours, it was empty. The overhead lights flickered in that arrhythmic pattern that maintenance had never bothered to fix. O'Yellerin pushed open the door and stepped inside. Pritchard was waiting. So were Hollister and Mulvaney and 2 other soldiers she recognized from the motor pool. 5 against 1. The door swung shut behind her with a sound like a cell closing. Staff Sergeant O'Yellerin, Pritchard said. He leaned against the row of sinks, arms crossed, his voice carrying the false warmth of a predator playing with its food. Thank you for joining us. She stopped 6 feet from the group, her posture relaxed, her hands visible at her sides. You wanted to talk, Master Sergeant. I wanted to understand. He pushed off from the sinks and began circling her slowly. You show up out of nowhere. You ask no questions. You make no friends. You spend your nights in the supply warehouse photographing documents that have nothing to do with your job. Inventory reconciliation, she said. The quarterly audit requires accurate records. Pritchard laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You know what I think? I think you're a spy. CID, maybe. Inspector General. Someone sent to dig up dirt on good soldiers who were just trying to survive in a system that does not care about them. Hollister moved to block the door. Mulvaney shifted to cover the window. The two motor pool soldiers flanked O'Yelleran on either side. The trap was complete. "I am a supply clerk," O'Yelleran said. "Nothing more. Then you will not mind if we search your quarters." Pritchard stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You will not mind if we go through your personal effects, your devices, your little secrets." She met his eyes without flinching. "You are welcome to submit a formal request through the chain of command." Something dark flickered across Pritchard's face. He was not accustomed to defiance. Not from soldiers he had already marked for destruction. "I'm going to give you one chance," he said quietly. "One chance to tell me who sent you and what you're looking for. Cooperate, and maybe this ends with just a transfer. Keep lying to me, and I promise you will regret it." The silence stretched between them. O'Yelleran could feel the violence coiling in the room, the readiness of the soldiers around her to do whatever Pritchard commanded. She calculated angles and distances, identified the weakest point in their formation, mapped 3 different escape routes. She could fight. She had the training. But fighting would blow her cover completely. It would end the mission and let the corruption network scatter before she could identify everyone involved. So she made a different choice. "I have nothing to tell you, Master Sergeant." "Because there is nothing to tell." Pritchard stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back and nodded to Hollister. The sergeant first class moved fast, grabbing O'Yelleran's arm and twisting it behind her back. Pain lanced through her shoulder, but she did not cry out. Mulvaney seized her other arm. The motor pool soldiers closed in, forming a wall of bodies that blocked any escape. "Last chance," Pritchard said. O'Yelleran said nothing. Pritchard reached into his pocket and withdrew a phone. He raised it, framing her face on the screen. "I want you to understand something. Whatever happens next, I'm going to document it. And if you ever try to use anything you have found against me, these images will surface. They will show a mentally unstable soldier who had to be restrained by her fellow NCOs. They will show a woman who cracked under pressure. Your word against mine, Staff Sergeant. And I have 18 years of credibility, while you have 3 weeks of rumors." He lowered the phone, but kept it ready. "Now," he gestured to the soldiers holding her, "we're going to have a conversation about loyalty, about knowing your place, about what happens to people who threaten the wrong Master Sergeant." The first blow caught her in the stomach. She doubled over, gasping, but the hands holding her arms kept her upright. The second blow landed on her ribs, the third on her lower back. Through the pain, O'Yelleran kept her focus. She noted which soldiers struck with enthusiasm and which held back. She memorized the positions of everyone in the room. She filed away every detail for the report she would make when this was over. Because it would be over. She had survived worse than this, in places that did not appear on any map, against enemies far more dangerous than a corrupt Master Sergeant with delusions of power. Pritchard watched the beating with clinical detachment. After the 4th blow, he raised his hand. "Enough." He crouched down to meet O'Yelleran's eyes. She was on her knees now, breathing hard, blood on her lip where she had bitten it to keep from screaming. "This was just a preview," he said softly. "A taste of what comes next if you do not leave this base. Request a transfer. Disappear. I do not care where you go, as long as you are gone by the end of the week." He stood and straightened his uniform. "Let her go." Hollister and Mulvaney released her. O'Yelleran slumped against the cold tile floor, her body aching, her mind already racing through her options. Pritchard walked to the door, then paused. "And, Staff Sergeant, if you think about reporting this, remember what I said. Your word against mine." He smiled. "Sleep well." They left her there, alone in the flickering light, bleeding on the bathroom floor. She waited until their footsteps faded. Then she pulled herself upright, leaned against the sink, and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. "This changes nothing," she whispered. "The mission continues." But even as she said it, she knew the game had changed. Pritchard was scared now. Scared people did desperate things. Whatever came next would be worse. She had perhaps 48 hours before he escalated again. She needed to find the officer. She needed to complete the mission. And she needed to do it before Pritchard destroyed her completely. 47 hours passed. O'Yelleran spent them hunting. She moved through the base like a woman with nothing left to lose, pulling records, cross-referencing signatures, tracing the paper trail that Pritchard thought he had buried. The bruises beneath her uniform throbbed with every movement, but pain was just information. It told her she was still alive, still fighting. On the second night, she found what she was looking for. Lieutenant-Colonel Raymond Hendricks, Deputy Commander of the Logistics Division. His signature appeared on 17 requisition forms that authorized transfers to units that did not exist. His name was buried in shipping manifests that routed equipment through contractors with no verifiable addresses. He had been careful, but not careful enough. O'Yelleran photographed everything. She encrypted the files and transmitted them to Phoenix Actual through the secure channel. The response came within minutes. Cardinal, we have enough for Hendricks and Pritchard. Extraction authorized. General Whitmore will arrive at 0900 tomorrow for retrieval and arrests. She should have felt relief. The mission was complete. Justice was coming. In 12 hours, she would be free of this place and everyone in it. Instead, she felt the weight of unfinished business pressing against her chest. Pritchard was still out there, still dangerous, and she had learned long ago that cornered animals were the most vicious. She transmitted her acknowledgement and began preparing for extraction. She never got the chance. The attack came at 0200 in the same latrine where they had beaten her 2 days before. O'Yelleran had gone to wash the exhaustion from her face, to steal a few minutes of solitude before the final hours of her mission. She did not hear them coming until it was too late. The door burst open. Hollister came through first, moving fast, catching O'Yelleran before she could react. Then Mulvaney. Then 3 others she did not recognize, faces hard with the desperate energy of men who knew they were running out of time. And behind them, Pritchard, holding something that glinted under the fluorescent lights. Electric clippers. O'Yelleran fought this time. She had no choice. Hollister's grip was iron around her throat, cutting off her air, but she drove her elbow backward into the woman's ribs. Hollister grunted, but held on. Mulvaney grabbed her arms. The others swarmed her, 6 bodies forcing her down onto the cold tile floor. She was strong. She was trained, but she was also bruised and exhausted and outnumbered 6-1. They pinned her flat. Hollister's knee pressed into her spine. Mulvaney held her wrists above her head. Someone else trapped her legs. She could not move, could barely breathe. Pritchard crouched beside her, the clippers buzzing to life in his hand. The sound filled the room, high and mechanical, drowning out everything else. I gave you a chance, he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it worse. I told you to leave. You did not listen. O'Yelleran strained against the hands holding her. Her muscles screamed. Her lungs burned. It made no difference. You think you are better than us, Pritchard continued. You think you can come here and judge us. Look down on us. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. Let me show you what we do to people who think they are better. The clippers touched her scalp. The first pass carved a stripe through her hair, sending dark curls tumbling to the white tile. O'Yelleran did not scream. She would not give them that. She locked her jaw and stared at the ceiling and retreated into the place inside herself where pain could not reach. But she felt it. Every pass of the blades. Every chunk of hair falling away. Every piece of herself being stripped from her body. Her mother had loved her hair, had braided it when she was small, humming old Yoruba songs while her fingers worked their patient magic. When her mother died, O'Yelleran had kept it short, but never shorn. A connection to the woman who had shaped her, a reminder of where she came from. Now it fell around her like black snow, scattered across the dirty floor of a military latrine, taken by men who wanted to break her. Pritchard worked methodically. He shaved her head down to the skin, leaving nothing behind. When he finished, he stood and admired his work. There, he said. Now everyone will see what you really are. Nothing. Nobody. Just another broken soldier who could not hack it. He pulled out his phone and took a photograph. The flash was blinding. This is my insurance, he said. You say one word about anything you think you saw, and this picture goes everywhere. To your family, your friends, every military network I can reach. He smiled. the crazy supply clerk who had a breakdown, who had to be restrained by her fellow NCOs, who shaved her own head in a mental episode. He nodded to the others. They released her and filed out one by one. Mulvaney was the last to leave. He looked back at her with something that might have been guilt, but he said nothing. The doors swung shut behind him. O'Yelleran lay on the cold tile, surrounded by her own hair, and let the silence settle over her. For a long moment, she did not move. She stared at the water-stained ceiling and felt the cool air against her bare scalp and allowed herself to break. Just for a moment, just long enough to release the pressure that had been building behind her eyes. One tear slid down her temple, then another. Then she was done. She sat up slowly. Her reflection stared back at her from a mirror above the sinks. A stranger's face, exposed, vulnerable, stripped of everything familiar. But the eyes were the same, dark and steady and unbroken. She rose to her feet. She gathered a handful of her fallen hair and held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she let it fall. She spoke one word in Yoruba, a word her mother had taught her, a word that meant something between promise and prayer. Tomorrow, she whispered, tomorrow you will see what I really am. General Whitmore was 6 hours away. The reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, Pritchard would learn that he had not broken her. He had only made her dangerous. Dawn broke over Fort Sill like a wound opening. O'Yelleran stood at the sink in her quarters, studying the stranger in the mirror. Her scalp was smooth now, freshly shaved by her own hand to even out the butchery Pritchard had left behind. She had spent an hour with a razor, transforming their act of cruelty into something deliberate, something owned. She put on her uniform with the same precision she brought to everything, adjusted her collar, straightened her insignia. The face looking back at her was different, but the soldier was the same. At 06:30, she walked to the parade ground for morning formation. The whispers started before she reached the assembly area. Soldiers turned to stare, their faces cycling through shock and confusion and barely concealed amusement. Someone laughed. Someone else muttered something about mental breakdowns. The rumors Pritchard had planted were doing their work. O'Yelleran took her place in formation and stared straight ahead. Pritchard stood at the front of the assembly, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the triumph in his eyes. He had won. The crazy supply clerk had finally cracked, shaved her own head in some kind of episode, and now everyone could see exactly how unstable she was. He did not know that 6 hours ago, she had transmitted final confirmation to Phoenix Actual. He did not know that a helicopter was already in the air, carrying a man who would dismantle everything Pritchard had built. He did not know that he had already lost. The morning passed in a haze of sidelong glances and hushed conversations. O'Yelleran reported to the supply warehouse, as usual, processed the same paperwork, maintained the same routines. Let them watch. Let them whisper. In a few hours, none of it would matter. At 08:45, the sound of rotor blades cut through the Oklahoma sky. Every head on the base turned toward the horizon. A Black Hawk helicopter descended toward the landing pad, its markings indicating a general officer aboard. Unannounced visits from flag officers did not happen at Fort Sill. Unannounced visits from anyone above the rank of colonel were practically unheard of. Pritchard felt the first flicker of unease. He watched the helicopter touch down, watched the ground crew scramble to receive it, watched a figure emerge from the cabin wearing the single star of a brigadier general. The officer moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had not come for pleasantries. "Who was that?" Hollister asked, appearing at Pritchard's side. "I do not know." Pritchard's mouth had gone dry. "But we are about to find out." Brigadier General Marcus Whitmore crossed the tarmac without acknowledging anyone. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had seen combat and politics, and everything in between. His eyes swept the base like searchlights, cataloging, assessing, judging. He stopped in front of the base commander, Colonel Patricia Vaughn, who had rushed out to meet him with barely concealed panic. "General Whitmore," she said, snapping a salute. "We were not informed of your visit. If I had known, I would have prepared a proper reception." Whitmore returned the salute, but did not smile. "I am not here for a reception, Colonel. I am here for one of your soldiers." Vaughn blinked. Sir? Staff Sergeant Kira O'Yelleran. Bring her to me. Now. The name rippled through the assembled soldiers like a stone dropped in still water. Pritchard felt his blood turn to ice. Hollister grabbed his arm. What do we do? Nothing, he hissed. We do nothing. Let me think. But there was nothing to think about. A general officer had arrived unannounced and asked for O'Yelleran by name. That did not happen by accident. That did not happen unless something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. O'Yelleran was escorted from the supply warehouse by 2 MPs who looked almost as confused as everyone else. She walked between them with her head high, her shaved scalp gleaming in the morning sun, her bearing as steady as it had been since the day she arrived. She stopped in front of General Whitmore and saluted. Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran reporting as ordered, sir. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. His gaze traveled over her face, her uniform, the smooth curve of her skull. Something flickered in his eyes, something cold and furious. Walk with me, Staff Sergeant. They moved away from the crowd, toward the administration building, speaking in voices too low for anyone else to hear. Pritchard watched them go, his mind racing through possibilities, searching for escape routes that did not exist. 10 minutes later, Whitmore and O'Yelleran emerged. The general's face had turned to granite. He spoke briefly to Colonel Vaughn, who immediately began issuing orders. MPs fanned out across the base. Radios crackled with urgent traffic. Whitmore walked to the center of the parade ground and raised his voice so every soldier on the base could hear. All personnel will assemble for formation in 1 hour. Full attendance. No exceptions. He paused, letting the words sink in. There will be a ceremony, and then there will be a reckoning. He turned and walked toward the command building without another word. O'Yelleran remained where she was, standing alone in the middle of the parade ground. Soldiers gave her a wide berth, confused and frightened by the sudden upheaval of their world. Only Private Kimball approached her. Staff Sergeant, he said quietly. What is happening? She looked at him with something that might have been gratitude. Justice, Private Kimball. She touched her bare scalp with one hand. Long overdue justice. 1 hour remained until the ceremony. Pritchard had 60 minutes to realize that everything he had done to destroy her was about to destroy him instead. The office was small and sparse, standard government furniture and fluorescent lighting, but it felt like a sanctuary after 3 weeks of war. General Whitmore closed the door and turned to face O'Yelleran. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence held everything that words could not capture. Then Whitmore crossed the room and embraced her. It was not regulation. It was not protocol. But Marcus Whitmore had known Kira O'Yelleran since she was 12 years old, since the day he had stood beside her father's flag-draped coffin and promised a grieving child that her sacrifice would not be forgotten. He stepped back and looked at her, really looked, the way a father looks at a daughter who has been through hell. Your head, he said quietly. They held me down. She kept her voice steady, but he could see the cost of that steadiness in her eyes. 6 of them, in the latrine, 3 hours before you landed. Whitmore's jaw tightened. The cold fury that had flickered across his face on the parade ground returned, sharper now, more focused. Names. Master Sergeant Dale Pritchard. Sergeant First Class Bryn Hollister. Specialist Trey Mulvaney. 3 others I can identify from unit rosters. And the officer? The one running the network? Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Hendricks. Deputy Logistics Commander. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device. Everything is documented. Financial records, requisition forms, shipping manifests. Approximately $200,000 in diverted equipment over 3 years. Hendricks provided the authorization. Pritchard handled the operations. The money was split through offshore accounts I am still tracing. Whitmore took the device and turned it over in his hands. 3 weeks. You built this case in 3 weeks while they were trying to destroy you. I had good training. He looked up at her, and something softened in his hard face. Your father would be proud. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had not allowed herself to think about her father during the mission, had not allowed herself to feel anything beyond the cold focus required to survive. But now, in this quiet room, With this man who had been her father's closest friend, the wall she had built began to crack. He died because no one had his back, she said. Her voice wavered for the first time. He was investigating corruption in his unit, and someone leaked his identity, and they killed him for it. May it look like combat. Everyone believed it was combat. Everyone except me, Whitmore said. I spent 6 years building the case. 6 years putting together the intelligence apparatus that could protect officers like your father. Like you. She met his eyes. Is that why you recruited me? I recruited you because you are brilliant and capable and the most naturally gifted intelligence operative I have ever trained. He paused. But I will be lying if I said your father's memory was not part of it. You carry his mission forward, Kira. Every corrupt officer you expose, every network you dismantle. You finish what he started. She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. Then she straightened, and the vulnerability vanished behind the mask of the soldier. What happens now? Now we end this. Whitmore moved to the window and looked out at the parade ground, where soldiers were already assembling for the ceremony he had announced. Pritchard and his people will be arrested. Hendricks, too. Courts-martial for the corruption. Additional charges for what they did to you. And my cover? Whitmore turned back to face her. That is your choice. We can maintain the fiction. Process the arrest quietly, transfer you out, let everyone believe you were just a supply clerk who stumbled onto something. She touched her bare scalp, feeling the smoothness where her hair had been. Or we tell them the truth. All of it. He studied her face. You have earned the right to walk out of here with your head high. To let every soldier on this base know exactly who they try to break. O'Yelleran was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the soldiers who had looked away while she was hazed. The ones who had believed the rumors. The ones who had laughed at her shaved head this morning. She thought about Private Kimball, who had warned her despite his fear. She thought about her mother, who had taught her that dignity was not something others could take. Only something you could surrender. Tell them, she said. Tell them everything. Whitmore nodded. There was pride in his eyes. I was hoping you would say that. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. For the ceremony, you will need to wear your actual rank. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a uniform jacket. The insignia on the shoulders bore the silver eagle of a colonel. O'Yelleran stared at it. My brevet rank. I have never actually worn it. Today you will. Whitmore handed her the jacket. Let them see exactly who they shaved. Let them understand exactly how badly they miscalculated. She took the jacket and held it against her chest. The weight of it felt like armor. Outside, the formation was nearly complete. 200 soldiers standing in rows, waiting for answers they could not imagine. Pritchard was among them, sweating in the morning heat, watching the command building with the desperate eyes of a man who sensed the walls closing in. He had no idea how right he was. The parade ground baked under the Oklahoma sun. 200 soldiers stood in formation, their uniforms dark with sweat, their faces tight with confusion and growing fear. Nobody knew why a general had arrived unannounced. Nobody knew why MPs had been positioning themselves around the perimeter for the past hour. Nobody knew anything except that the world had somehow shifted beneath their feet. Pritchard stood in the front row where senior NCOs assembled, his eyes fixed on the command building. Hollister was 2 rows behind him. Mulvaney somewhere in the back, trying to make himself invisible. They had not spoken since the helicopter landed. There was nothing to say. Either the storm would pass, or it would destroy them all. Colonel Vaughn emerged from the command building first. Her face was pale, her movements stiff, the bearing of an officer who had just learned something devastating about her own command. She took her position at the front of the formation and waited. General Whitmore appeared next, and beside him walked Kira O'Yelleran. But not the O'Yelleran they knew. The woman crossing the parade ground wore the uniform of a full colonel. Silver eagles gleamed on her shoulders. Her shaved head caught the sunlight like polished bronze. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years in places where hesitation meant death. The formation rippled with shock. Soldiers who had mocked her, ignored her, believed every rumor Pritchard had spread, now stared in disbelief at the insignia that outranked everyone on the base except the general himself. Pritchard felt his knees go weak. No, he whispered. That is not possible. But it was possible. It was real. And it was walking directly toward him. Whitmore stopped at the center of the formation and let the silence stretch. He wanted them uncomfortable. He wanted them to feel the weight of what was coming. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice carrying across the parade ground. A soldier arrived at this base undercover. Her mission was to investigate a corruption network that had been diverting military equipment for personal profit. A network that operated with impunity because it was protected by senior personnel who abused their authority to silence anyone who got too close. He paused, letting the words sink in. That soldier is Colonel Kira O'Yelleran, Joint Special Operations Intelligence Division. She holds a classified brevet rank that places her among the most trusted operatives in the United States military. She has served in theaters I cannot name, conducted operations that will never appear in any official record, and repeatedly risked her life to protect soldiers who will never know her name. Whitmore turned to look directly at Pritchard, and for the past 3 weeks, she has been systematically brutalized by members of this command who suspected she was investigating them. They spread rumors to isolate her. They assigned her degrading duties to break her spirit. They physically assaulted her on multiple occasions. His voice hardened to steel, and last night, 6 soldiers held her down in a latrine and shaved her head while their ringleader photographed the assault for leverage. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. O'Yelleran stepped forward. Her eyes swept the formation, taking in every face, every expression of shock and guilt and dawning horror. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. I want you to understand something. What was done to me was not just an attack on one soldier. It was an attack on everything this uniform represents. On honor, on integrity, on the basic dignity that every person who serves deserves. She touched her bare scalp. They took my hair because they thought it would break me. They thought if they humiliated me enough, dehumanized me enough, I would run. I would hide. I would disappear and let their corruption continue. Her gaze found Pritchard. They were wrong. Whitmore nodded to the MPs positioned around the perimeter. Master Sergeant Dale Pritchard, Sergeant First Class Bryn Hollister, Specialist Trey Mulvaney. Stepped forward. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Hollister broke. She bolted from formation, sprinting toward the motor pool, her boots pounding against the concrete. She made it 15 feet before 2 MPs tackled her to the ground. Pritchard did not run. He stood frozen, watching his world collapse as MPs closed in from both sides. His face had gone gray. His hands trembled at his sides. You do not understand, he said, his voice cracking. I was just trying to protect myself. She was investigating us. I knew she was investigating us. O'Yelleran walked toward him slowly. The formation parted to let her pass. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead, the terror in his eyes. You were right, she said quietly. I was investigating you, but not for the reasons you thought. What do you mean? The equipment theft was never my primary target. She let that sink in. You were bait, Master Sergeant. The real target was always Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks. You were just a trail that led me to him. Pritchard's face crumbled. He had thought he was the predator. He had thought he was protecting his empire. Instead, he had been nothing but a pawn, sacrificed to expose a bigger player. MPs seized his arms. He did not resist. As they led him away, O'Yelleran turned back to the formation. 200 soldiers stared at her with expressions ranging from shame to awe. She had one more thing to say. Some of you watched what happened to me and did nothing. Some of you heard the rumors and believed them without question. Some of you laughed this morning when you saw my head. She paused. I do not blame you for being afraid. Fear is human, but silence has a cost. Every time you look away from injustice, you make it easier for the next injustice to happen. Her eyes found Private Kimball in the crowd, and some of you showed courage when courage was dangerous. That matters. That is what separates soldiers from cowards. She turned and walked back to General Whitmore's side. The reckoning had begun, but it was not over yet. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Hendricks had been watching from the edge of the parade ground. He had positioned himself near the motor pool, close enough to observe, but far enough to slip away, if necessary. When Whitmore began speaking, when the words corruption network and senior personnel left the general's mouth, Hendricks felt the ground shift beneath him. When O'Yelleran stepped forward in a colonel's uniform, he understood. He did not wait to hear his name. He turned and walked quickly toward the administrative parking lot, his keys already in his hand, his mind calculating distances and timelines. Fort Sill to the Oklahoma border, the border to Dallas, Dallas to anywhere. He had money hidden, accounts Pritchard knew nothing about, contacts who owed him favors. If he could get off base in the next 5 minutes, he might still salvage something from the wreckage. His sedan was parked in the third row. He reached it, unlocked it, slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the first try. He allowed himself one breath of relief. Then he looked up and saw O'Yelleran standing in front of his car. She was alone. No MPS. No General Whitmore. Just a woman in a colonel's uniform with a shaved head and eyes that held absolutely nothing he could negotiate with. Hendricks considered his options. He could floor the accelerator. She would have to move or be hit. It would add charges, but he was already facing decades. What was one more crime? His foot hovered over the gas pedal. O'Yelleran did not move, did not flinch. She simply watched him with the patience of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of this moment. "I know what you are thinking," she said. Her voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "You're thinking that I am one woman and you are in a two-ton vehicle and physics is on your side." Hendricks said nothing. His foot pressed down slightly, feeling the engine respond. "But here's what you do not know." She took one step closer. "I spent 4 years in places where men, with much more to lose than you try to kill me. Men with training and resources and absolute conviction. None of them succeeded. Another step. You're a logistics officer who got greedy. You have never fired a weapon outside a qualification range. You have never faced anyone who was not afraid of your rank." She stopped directly in front of the hood, close enough that he could see the scars on her knuckles, the calm certainty in her eyes. "I am not afraid of your rank, Lieutenant Colonel. And if you try to run me down, I promise you will not make it off this base alive." Hendricks stared at her through the windshield. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. His foot trembled over the pedal. He thought about his career, his family, the life he had built on a foundation of stolen equipment and falsified records. All gone now. All of it ash. He turned off the engine. MPs materialized from between the parked cars, surrounding the sedan, weapons drawn. Hendricks raised his hands slowly as they pulled him from the vehicle. O'Yelleran stepped aside to let them pass. Hendricks looked at her as they led him away, his face a mask of bitter defeat. "You ruined everything," he said. 18 years of service. Destroyed by some supply clerk playing dress-up. O'Yelleran met his gaze without emotion. "You ruined yourself, Colonel. The moment you decided your career was worth more than your honor, this ending became inevitable. I just accelerated the timeline. They took him away." She watched until he disappeared around the corner of the motor pool, then allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction. 3 targets, 3 arrests, mission complete. She walked back toward the parade ground, where the formation had dissolved into clusters of confused and shaken soldiers. The rigid structure of military order had crumbled under the weight of revelation. People who had stood shoulder to shoulder for months now looked at each other with new eyes, wondering who had known, who had participated, who had looked away. General Whitmore intercepted her halfway across the tarmac. "Hendricks?" he asked. "In custody." She fell into step beside him. He tried to run, changed his mind. Whitmore glanced at her. "Did you give him a choice?" "I gave him an opportunity to make a smart decision. He took it." They walked in silence for a moment. The Oklahoma wind had picked up, carrying the smell of dust and diesel and something that might have been change. "The investigation will take months," Whitmore said. "Courts-martial, depositions, financial audits. The corruption went deeper than we initially assessed. There are at least 4 more personnel involved at various levels." O'Yelleran nodded. "I can provide testimony, documentation, whatever you need." What I need is for you to take some time. Whitmore stopped and turned to face her. You have been undercover for 3 weeks. You have been beaten, isolated, and assaulted. You need to decompress before we discuss your next assignment. She started to protest, but he raised a hand. That is not a request, Colonel. It is an order. Take a week. Go somewhere that is not a military base. Remember what it feels like to be a person instead of an operative. O'Yelleran considered arguing. The mission was complete, but there was always another mission. Another network to dismantle. Another injustice to expose. But Whitmore was right. She could feel the exhaustion beneath her adrenaline, the accumulated weight of 3 weeks of constant vigilance. Her body needed rest. Her mind needed silence. 1 week, she said. 1 week, he agreed. Then we will talk about what comes next. She nodded and turned to walk away. Colonel Wallaron. She stopped. Whitmore's voice was softer now. Your father would have been proud, not just of the mission, of the woman you have become. She did not trust herself to respond. She simply nodded once and kept walking. Behind her, the sun climbed higher over Fort Sill, burning away the shadows of corruption and silence. The reckoning was complete, but the healing had only just begun. The holding facility was quiet in the afternoon heat. O'Yelleran had not planned to come here. She had planned to return to her quarters, pack her things, and leave Fort Sill without looking back. But something had pulled her toward this building, toward the man who had tried to destroy her. Pritchard sat alone in an interrogation room, his wrists cuffed to the table, his uniform stripped of rank insignia. He looked smaller without his authority, diminished. The master sergeant who had terrorized an entire base now looked like exactly what he was. A frightened man facing the consequences of his choices. He looked up when she entered. His eyes widened, then narrowed, cycling through surprise and hatred before settling on something like resignation. Come to gloat? He asked. O'Yelleran sat down across from him. The table between them was standard government issue, scratched and dented from years of difficult conversations. No, she said. I came to understand. Understand what? Why? She leaned back in her chair, studying him with clinical detachment. You had 18 years. Commendations. A career that could have ended with honor. Why throw it away for money you did not need? Pritchard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. You do not know what it is like. Spending 2 decades following orders, watching officers half your age get promoted over you, knowing you will never climb any higher no matter how good you are. He shook his head. The system does not reward people like me. It uses us up and throws us away. So you decided to take what you thought you deserved. I decided to stop being a fool. He met her eyes. You think you're different? You think your classified rank and your secret missions make you special? You're just another tool. When they're done with you, they will discard you too. O'Yelleran considered his words. There is truth buried in the bitterness. The military did use people. It did discard them. She had seen it happen to soldiers far more deserving than Pritchard. But that was not the whole story. My father served for 22 years, she said quietly. He never stole a penny, never abused his authority, never hurt a soldier under his command. And when he died exposing corruption in his unit, the army buried the truth to avoid embarrassment. Pritchard blinked. I did not know that. No, you did not. She leaned forward. The system failed my father. It fails a lot of good people. But that does not give you the right to become the thing that destroys them. You did not just steal equipment, Master Sergeant. You created a culture of fear. You broke soldiers who had done nothing wrong. You held me down and shaved my head because you were afraid of what I might find. Her voice hardened. You had a choice. Every single day, you had a choice. And every single day, you chose to be the monster. Pritchard looked away. His jaw worked silently. For a moment, she thought she saw something like shame flicker across his face. What happens now? He asked. Courts-martial. O'Yelleran stood. Charges for corruption, assault, conduct unbecoming. You will spend years in military prison. When you get out, you will have nothing. No pensión. No benefits. No honor. She walked to the door, then paused. But you'll have time. Time to decide if the man you became is the man you want to die as. She left him alone with his choices. Outside, the The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The base had returned to something like normal operations, but the atmosphere had changed. Soldiers moved differently now, spoke differently. The shadow of Pritchard's reign had lifted, and people were slowly remembering what it felt like to serve without fear. O'Yelleran found Specialist Mulvaney sitting on a bench outside the holding facility. He had been processed and released pending formal charges. His role had been smaller than Pritchard's or Hollister's. He had followed orders, held her arms, watched while they shaved her head. Complicity rather than leadership. He looked up as she approached. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. "Colonel," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "I did not know what to say when I saw you this morning. I still do not." O'Yelleran sat down beside him. The bench was warm from the sun. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Not an accusation. A genuine question. Mulvaney stared at his hands. "Because I was scared." Pritchard, he controlled everything. Assignments. Evaluations. If you crossed him, your career was over. I saw what he did to people who pushed back. So you helped him destroy me instead. He flinched. Yes. He swallowed hard. I told myself I did not have a choice. But that was a lie. I had a choice. I was just too weak to make it. The silence stretched between them. Somewhere across the base, a drill sergeant was calling cadence. Life continuing despite everything. "You will face charges," O'Yelleran said finally. "Assault. Conspiracy. Your career is over." "I know, but you are young." 23, 24, 24. She nodded. Young enough to rebuild, to become someone different. She turned to look at him directly. "The question is whether you will. Whether this moment breaks you or changes you." Mulvaney met her eyes for the first time. "How can you even talk to me? After what I did?" "Because I have seen what happens to people who never get the chance to face their failures." She thought of her father, of the men who killed him and never faced justice. They rot from the inside. They become Pritchard, bitter and corrupt, and convinced the world owes them something. She stood. "You held my arms while they took my hair. I will never forget that. But I'm not going to carry hatred for you. That would give you power over me that you do not deserve." She began walking away. "Colonel Wallahon." She stopped. Mulvaney's voice was barely a whisper. "I am sorry. I know it does not fix anything, but I'm sorry." She did not turn around. "Prove it," she said. "Not to me. To the next person you have the chance to help or hurt. Prove it then." She walked toward her quarters as the sun painted the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and gold. Behind her, Mulvaney remained on the bench, staring at his hands, beginning the long work of becoming someone worthy of forgiveness. Private First Class DeAndre Kimball was packing his locker when O'Yelleran found him. The barracks were nearly empty in the late afternoon, most soldiers still processing the day's events in small groups scattered across the base. Kimball worked alone, folding uniforms with mechanical precision, his movements those of someone trying very hard not to think. He looked up when her shadow fell across his bunk. His eyes went wide at the colonel's eagles on her shoulders. "Staff Sergeant," he started, then caught himself. "I mean, Colonel. Mung. I did not expect to see you here." O'Yelleran leaned against the doorframe. "At ease, Private. I'm not here for formalities." He relaxed slightly, but remained standing. She could see the questions burning behind his eyes, the confusion of a young soldier whose world had inverted in a single morning. "You warned me," she said, "when no one else would, when it could have cost you everything." Kimball shifted uncomfortably. "I did not do much. Just told you what I heard. You did more than 200 other soldiers on this base." She stepped into the room. "Courage is not about grand gestures, DeAndre. It is about small choices made when no one is watching. You made the right choice." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Those nights you helped me study." He swallowed. "Was that part of your cover? Just getting close to someone who might have information?" O'Yelleran considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. "No," she said. "My cover required me to be invisible. Forgettable. Helping you actually increased my risk of exposure." She paused. "I helped you because you reminded me of someone I used to be. Young and struggling and convinced you were not good enough." Kimball's brow furrowed. "You? Me?" She moved to sit on the bunk across from his. "I failed my first qualification exam. Twice. My instructors told me I did not have what it took, that I should find a different path. What changed? Someone believed in me when I did not believe in myself. A mentor who saw something I could not see. She met his eyes. I wanted to be that person for you. Cover or no cover. The words hung between them. Outside, the sounds of the base filtered through the windows. Vehicles moving. Voices calling. The ordinary rhythm of military life continuing despite everything. What happens to you now? Kimball asked. I leave tomorrow. Another assignment. Another mission. She smiled slightly. The work does not stop. Will I ever see you again? Probably not. The world I operate in does not overlap much with regular Army life. But that does not mean I will forget you. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. This is a letter of recommendation. It details your character, your integrity, your courage under pressure. She handed it to him. When you're ready to apply for officer candidate school, this will help. Kimball stared at the paper like it might burst into flames. Officer candidate school? I'm just a PFC. I barely passed my promotion exam. You passed, she said firmly. And you showed more leadership in one moment of courage than most officers show in entire careers. Do not let anyone tell you what you cannot become, including yourself. He unfolded the letter and read the first few lines. His eyes grew wet, but he blinked the moisture away with the stubborn pride of a young soldier who had not yet learned that tears were not weakness. Thank you, he said. His voice was thick. For everything. Not just this. For seeing me when no one else did. O'Yelleran stood. She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. Keep studying, she said. Keep growing. And when you get your commission, remember what it felt like to be invisible. Remember, and make sure no soldier under your command ever feels that way. She walked to the door. Colonel Wallaron. She turned. Kimball stood at attention, his bearing straighter than she had ever seen it. It was an honor to serve with you, ma'am. She returned his salute. The honor was mine, Private Kimball. She left him standing in the fading light, holding a letter that might change his life. Her quarters were sparse when she returned. 3 weeks of possessions fit into a single duffel bag. The life of an operative did not allow for accumulation. She packed methodically, checking each item, ensuring nothing remained that might compromise future operations. When the bag was full, she sat on the edge of the bare mattress and withdrew her mother's photograph. The face that looked back at her was frozen in time. A woman who had cleaned houses and saved pennies and dreamed of a daughter who would change the world. I did it, Mama, she whispered. Not just the mission. All of it. I stood when they tried to break me. I finished what Papa started. The photograph offered no response. It never did. But somehow, in the quiet of that empty room, O'Yelleran felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Oklahoma heat. She tucked the photograph into her jacket, close to her heart. Tomorrow she would leave this place. Tomorrow she would become someone else, somewhere else, hunting different shadows. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply be Kira. Not a colonel, not an operative, just a daughter who had kept her promises. She lay back on the mattress and closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 weeks, she slept without dreaming. Morning came soft and golden over Fort Sill. O'Yelleran stood at the edge of the helicopter pad, her duffel bag at her feet, watching the sun climb above the Oklahoma plains. The air was cooler than it had been in weeks, carrying the first hints of autumn on the wind. Change was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Behind her, the base was waking up. Soldiers moving to morning formation. Vehicles rumbling to life. The eternal rhythm of military existence continuing as it always did, regardless of what storms had passed through. She heard footsteps approaching and turned to find General Whitmore walking toward her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Figured you could use this before you go, he said, offering her one. She took it, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. Thank you, sir. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the horizon brighten. 2 soldiers who had seen too much and carried too many secrets, sharing a quiet moment before the world demanded they become weapons again. I reviewed your after-action report, Whitmore said finally. Thorough as always. The financial trail you uncovered extends to 3 other installations. We will be busy for months. O'Yellerin nodded. The corruption never exists in isolation. Pull one thread, find a dozen more. Which brings me to your next assignment. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder. Whenever you are ready. She did not take it. Not yet. Can I ask you something first? Of course. She turned to face him. When you recruited me, did you know it would be like this? The isolation, the violence, becoming someone else so completely that you forget who you started as. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. His eyes, usually so sharp and commanding, softened with something that looked like regret. I knew, he said. I knew because I lived it. 30 years of becoming other people, hunting shadows, losing pieces of myself along the way. He paused. I told myself I was preparing you for the reality of the work. But the truth is, no one can prepare you for this. You can only survive it or be consumed by it. And which am I? He looked at her, really looked, the way he had when she was 12 years old, and asking why her father was never coming home. You are the strongest operative I have ever trained, he said. But strength is not the same as invulnerability. What they did to you here, he gestured toward the base, that leaves marks. Not all of them visible. Örelar untouched här bara scalp. The stubble was beginning to grow back, soft and fine against her palm. It will grow back, she said. I'm not talking about your hair. She knew. She had felt it in the quiet moments. The flinch when someone moved too quickly behind her. The way her hands still trembled sometimes when she was alone. The nightmares that had not yet come, but surely would. I'm not broken, she said. It was not a defense. Just a statement of fact. No, Whitmore agreed. You're not broken, but you are wounded. And wounds need time to heal, even for people like us. The helicopter appeared on the horizon, a black speck growing larger against the brightening sky. Her ride to whatever came next. O'Yellerin took the folder from Whitmore's hand and tucked it into her jacket without opening it. 1 week, she said. You ordered me to take 1 week. I did. Then I will read this in 7 days. She met his eyes. But I will be ready. Whitmore smiled. It was a rare expression on his weathered face. I never doubted it. The helicopter landed in a storm of dust and noise. O'Yellerin picked up her duffel bag and walked toward it, then stopped. She turned back one last time. Across the base, she could see the soldiers assembling for morning formation. 200 men and women who had watched her suffer and stayed silent. 200 men and women who now knew the truth about who she was and what they had allowed to happen. Some of them would carry shame for years. Others would forget within months, absorb back into the comfortable rhythms of military life. A few might actually change, might remember this moment the next time they saw injustice and had to choose between courage and convenience. She could not control any of that. She could only control herself. Her gaze found one figure standing apart from the formation. Private First Class DeAndre Kimball, watching the helicopter pad, his hand raised in a small wave. She raised her hand in return. Then she climbed into the helicopter and did not look back. The aircraft lifted off, banking east toward destinations unknown. Below, Fort Sill grew smaller, becoming just another patch of brown and green in the vast Oklahoma landscape. O'Yellerin leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. The folder sat heavy in her jacket, full of new names and new shadows and new battles to fight. But for now, in this suspended moment between missions, she allowed herself to simply breathe. She ran her hand over her scalp, feeling the stubble that would become hair that would become a reminder of everything she had survived. They had tried to break her with shame. They had failed. They had tried to silence her with violence. They had failed. They had shaved her head to crush her spirit, and instead, they had revealed a strength they could not comprehend. She was Colonel Kira O'Yellerin, daughter of heroes, hunter of shadows, unbroken, and she was just getting started. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who was underestimated and proved everyone wrong.